This video is going to discuss two sacred cities in ancient Greece. We've discussed Athens, which, though it had a sacred precinct for Athena, we also talked about Olympia, which was known as a holy place where different cities could compete in sporting events. And therefore, it was considered a sacred place, and wars could not be fought while the Olympics were going on, and nor could an athlete be attacked should he be walking through an enemy territory in order to attend the Olympics. Now, Delos, shown here on the map, is a little island in the center of the Cyclades where there is a sanctuary to Apollo and also of the Delians. Delos would become very important in the 5th century because it is here that Pericles and what was called the Delian League banked all their collected money. Delos was chosen not only because it was a sanctuary and therefore could not be violated, but Delos is also an island with no water. And so, therefore, there's no natural inhabitants of it, anyways. It needs to be accessed through the island of Mykonos. Once again, remember that Pericles collected a bunch of people from a bunch of territories around Greece to join the Delian League in order that everybody would contribute money so that Athens could build a huge navy in order to protect itself. And in the meantime, Pericles skimmed off the top in order to build the Parthenon. He had put in a little provision that everybody could use some of the money to rebuild the temples destroyed by the Persians. Of course, nobody had any idea that Pericles was going to build such a successful one like he did on the Parthenon. But I've already discussed that. On Delos, rather, we see here a reconstruction of a very, very, very large area, indeed a city unto itself. And we won't talk about every part of it, but just some important features. And we can see here the precinct of Apollo. We will do Delos and Delphi, both areas important to Apollo. And we can see here the sanctuary of Apollo on the top center and the temple of Apollo below, and then treasuries to the left. I won't talk about any of the treasuries at Delos, but I will later on in this lecture discuss the treasuries at Delphi. And basically, these treasuries were put here because they were indeed sacred cities, and they should not be violated. They had the sort of the emphasis that a church would have today, a cathedral, where one could, to harm it would be the greatest of blasphemies. And so this idea was combined with, quite frankly, banking. And as I'll talk about in an upcoming lecture, in fact, the Parthenon was, amongst other things, used as a bank in Athens. In any case, here we can see part of the sanctuary to Zeus there on this site. It's a very, very large site. I'm sorry to say I haven't had a chance to visit it. I was hoping to visit this summer, but we will see what happens. And around that is the very famous Terrace of the Lions. And I show you this. This is quite interesting because this is the sacred way, the walkway through this sanctuary. And it is lined by these statues of lions built about 600 BC. Why this is very interesting, the platform of the lions, Delos, is interesting because it's replicating or copying the Avenue of the Sphinxes, which connects the cities of Luxor and Karnak in central Egypt. And what's fascinating about this is this was, the Avenue of the Sphinxes was easily 1,000 years before the platform of the lions in Delos. Moreover, it's in central Egypt, not on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt, well over 1,000 miles deep down the Nile. So they had some understanding or knowledge of this avenue of the Sphinxes and replicated, but on a much, much smaller scale. Here's another view of the avenue of the Sphinxes. This is entry into Karnak. And this road, I was just there last year, goes south for many miles till it connects with Luxor. And due to modern constructions, there are highways that go through it and train tracks, etc. It's just a massive construction. And here are some other buildings at Delos. You've already seen the one on the right, the sanctuary to Apollo. I want to point out this theater on the left. I'm going to have a separate lecture about theaters in Greece, but I just want to point out this one and that there are many, many other cities, and I'll talk about that, especially when we talk about Alexander the Great. There's also this strange structure, though built a couple centuries after we're talking about now. It's called the Storvadion, and it was built in commemoration of a artistic competition, a theatrical competition, and it once held a statue to Dionysus. This is a little bit ahead of us in time-wise, but I pointed out here because this is one of the most popular things that people talk about on Delos. The statue of Dionysus was flanked by these two massive phalloi. Dionysus, remember, was the god of partying and revelry, etc., and sexual behavior, and so that's why these penises are shown here. Once again, this really emphasizes the different attitudes towards sexuality in the pre-Christian world. Now we can turn to Delphi, up in central Greece, about an hour and a half drive northwest of Athens, called the belly button of the ancient world, which I'll explain in a moment. But it was also the oracle, the best known oracle of the ancient world, and therefore also sacred to Apollo, because Apollo was the god of of many things, but also of oracles. Delphi is located in the area in the map on the bottom left. And here we see this sculpture called the omphalos, which means the belly button. And Delphi was considered the center of the universe, and hence the belly button. This omphalos, the stone here, the story behind it goes back to mythology. And the myth is that of Kronos and Zeus. If you remember, Kronos, fearful that the children he was having with Rhea would usurp power from him, ate all of his children. Rhea, unhappy with this, at one point took a rock and hid Zeus on Crete and took his claws and wrapped a rock in it, which he then ate and then forced him to vomit up all the gods he had previously eaten, hence the Olympians. And the Olympians would eventually battle with these, what are called the Titans or the Giants, and take over the cosmology of Greece. And when he coughed up this stone, it landed at Delphi and made it a holy place. Here we see the larger layout of Delphi on the left. We will concentrate on the sacred precinct, and then I'll show you the theater that is a little bit above it to the upper left, and more to the upper left is the hippodrome or stadium. On the right, you see a close-up of the sacred precinct. And here's a better view of it. Now, when you enter the sacred precinct, you would walk from the bottom of this slide, the bottom right, on the sacred way, and you zigzag up this hill. that takes you past the treasuries of many cities, then finally the temple to Apollo itself. And if you have the energy, you climb farther up the hill to see the theater and hippodrome. And this is a shot of the sacred way, passing the treasury of the Athenians, which I'll come back to in a moment. I want to digress shortly to talk about the importance of Delphi. And the importance of Delphi was that it had an oracle. Many other places in the ancient world had oracles, but Delphi was considered the most reliable of the oracles. And this is how it worked. You went to somewhere in Delphi, to a cave around here somewhere, we're not sure where it is, to ask a priestess a question. You would ask her a question, and then she'd be lowered down into a crevasse. And we now think this crevasse, this cut into the stone, this cave, had natural gases coming out of it. And the breathing of these natural gases causes you to get high. I don't know if any of you have had these experiences. I know when I was a kid growing up outside of Pittsburgh, there was a place in the woods where there was just a little hole in the ground. And you could, if you took a match to it, you could light it and a little flame would come out. And it was just the natural release of natural gases. Obviously, in the ancient world, they didn't have a clue about this. And so they thought something magical was happening when they put this female priestess called the Delphic, the Pythian, the Oracle of Delphi. So there are some very, very famous stories that surround this. Perhaps you're most familiar with that of the story of Oedipus, the king, Oedipus Rex, when he is told by a guy in some bar that he wasn't really his parents' children. He goes to the Delphic oracle and asks, what's up? And they say, the oracle tells him, he will kill his father and marry his mother. Obviously, two massive taboos. Again, I'll come back to this subject in a future discussion. And so in trying to avoid his fate, he decides not to go back home, but to go to Thebes. And along the way, he runs into an old man. They have a moment of road rage. He kills the old man, and then he proceeds on to Thebes, where he answers a riddle of the Sphinx and saves the city from a plague. And therefore, this queen, who has newly been widowed because her husband just died on the road, marries Oedipus, who is the savior of the city, unbeknownst to her that this is her son. And so the Delphic oracle plays a very important part in this play of these great taboos. Once again, I'm going to talk about plays a bit more in a later lecture. But some other famous oracles, this is the one where Socrates left Athens and went to the Delphic oracle and asked who the smartest man in Athens was, to which the oracle said, "You are." And as he walked home to Athens, he was perplexed that the oracle would say he was the smartest man, because there was so much he knew he did not know. But then he finally realized he was the only man in Athens that knew there was a lot he did not know. And the people that think they know everything are in fact fools. And there are many other stories of wars that were won and lost based on what the oracle told them. And it was strongly believed. It was in the 4th century that there was an earthquake, 4th century AD, there was an earthquake in this area, and the people thought that the oracle had lost its magical power, its divine power. But in fact, probably what happened was that the cavern that was releasing the natural gases was closed off, was collapsed by the earthquake. Now, as we walk up the sacred way back to the site itself, we will first see, or not first see, but we'll see the treasury of the Siphnians. I'm going to talk about two treasuries briefly, and there's the Siphnians, and I'll talk about the treasury of the Athenians. Now, as you can see on this on the left, on the drawing of the treasury, you can see that there's two caryatids on the front, on the east face, holding up the roof. We've seen caryatids before at the Parthenon, or I'm sorry, at the Erechtheion on the Acropolis. There, I argue that they tend to have a Doric feel to them. Well, this is definitely an Ionic structure because we can see under the pediment that the frieze is continuous. It is not interrupted by triglyphs. And so, therefore, this is an Ionic structure. There are the two caryatids, and then on each side are engaged piers or pilasters. And you can see on the right, bottom right, a photograph of it, and on the top right, a reconstruction of the structure as it was painted. The pediments show a number of different things. In this case, on the top pediment, it shows Heracles trying to steal Apollo's lyre. The purpose of that is that it's an obscure reference to how Apollo was inspired to make this place holy. We can see that again on the bottom. The top and the bottom replicate each other. On the bottom part of the frieze, remember the frieze will go on four sides. The pediments are just on two sides. Below this reference to Apollo having his lyre stolen, we see the judgment of Paris on the bottom, and this is a reference to the beginning of the Trojan War. Here you can see a close-up of it. On other sides, we see things like the battle with the Titans, or the assembly of the gods before the Trojan War. We won't go into this in great extent here. Here, once again, a close up of Heracles trying to steal Apollo's lyre. We won't go through all of these, but I wanted to point out here that we can see the archaic style in these relief sculptures and the great amount of detail and the busyness involved in them. And let me go to another drawing here, which shows once again on the top here a reconstruction of the deities gathered, and with Thetis on the far right, indicating that this is the marriage of Peleus and Thetis, which caused the judgment of Paris. Peleus and Thetis were the parents of Achilles. On the bottom, we see another reference to the Trojan War. The Achilles on the right with the Greek fighting the Trojans with Memnon the Egyptian. Interestingly enough, this battle takes place after the Iliad ends, and so we never have it really recorded by Homer, but it's known mythologically. I do want to point out that you see these scratches in the background to the sides of the relief sculptures, and they are in fact giving us the names so we know what's being discussed here. And here's just a detail of that. But I want to show you this one here, where you can see on this left with a reconstructed painting, where perhaps you can make out on the upper right where it says Memnon. So we have the names preserved for us here. Now back to the treasury of the Athenians. Here's a better shot of it. And we can see here our typical Doric style with the pediment on the top, and then the triglyphs and metopes in the entablature or architrave area. It is similar to the treasury of the Delphians in that it has two columns in the front and then pilasters on each side. We can see that these are Doric columns. I should emphasize that these things, once again, are treasuries. So, unlike temples, they weren't meant for people to visit them, visit the interior that much. And here we can see a reconstruction of it and some of the statues that are preserved for us in the in the at the Athenian treasury. Um, Interestingly enough, it was dedicated after the Battle of Marathon when they beat the Persians and Darius in the first major battle, and became a national monument for the Athenians and their victory over the Persians. So, for example, we'll see things like the metopes showing the conquest of Theseus, who was the hero of Athens, who was sort of copied Heracles and indeed copied many of his labors. Here we see another close-up of it, and there is a reconstruction of it on the right as it was painted. Back to the metopes here, we see how fragmentary they are. Once again, they primarily deal with the labors of Theseus, because this is celebrating the Athenians. Once again, his labors are similar to Heracles. And we see on the right where the metopes would be placed, on the bottom right and on the top, we see an example of one as well. Once again, very fragmentary. Interestingly enough, these statues of Cleobus and Biton were found in this treasury. They had originally been displayed in the city of Argos, but ended up being stored as votive offerings to the Delphic oracle in the treasury of Atreus. Now, as we climb up the mountainside, we get to the temple of Apollo. And here we can see what is left of it. We can see the many column drums used to make this Doric structure. Here's a more impressive view of it. You can see the temple there on the lower left, the treasury of Atreus to its right. And then this spectacular view over the landscape, one of the most spectacular views that an archaeological site in Greece has. Just another shot of it. You can see how it's built amongst the crags of Mount Parnassus in the central part of Greece. And yet again, another shot because it's just pretty dramatic. And then you climb up farther up the hill and you get to this theater with its stage. Once again, I'll talk more about theaters, but I just wanted to show you this so you get a feel for how frequent these theaters are and the impact on that I will talk about more later on. Here's another shot. Since plays were held in the day, it must have been pretty spectacular to be seated in this theater and watching a play with this background. And then you continue up even farther up the hillside, and if it's the summer, that's a killer. And you come to the Hippodrome, the place where the horse races happen. And remember, Delphi was one of the four cities in which athletic tournaments were held. Another shot of the Hippodrome here. One thing that's quite interesting is that there used to be a pole at one end of the Hippodrome, which is the pole that the horses had to go around during the race. It's called a snake column because it has this serpentine structure to it, i.e. it coils up. Built after the dedication of the Battle of Plataea. I haven't discussed this battle. It was shortly after the Persians defeated Salamis at 480, and then the Persians were defeated again. But interestingly enough, this is now located in Istanbul, where when the Ottoman Turks took it way back when and put it in their capital, and you can see that there's also an Egyptian obelisk behind it as well. So these are early examples of cultural acquisition. And also, lastly, we're going to talk about the very famous charioteer from Delphi. This is one of the few statues that was not found underwater but was preserved for us, was found in an excavation. And you can see he's here in this charioteer's gown and holding what is left of the bridles. Here's another shot. There's a couple things to pay attention to. First of all, we can see that it was made in parts, and we're missing, for example, part of the left arm. It's a hollow statue, again, made out of the lost wax technique. The reason that the body underneath the belt looks so long is because it was originally in a chariot that covered up most of his legs. So his feet could be seen at the bottom, as I'll show you in a moment. And then right above the sides of the chariot, you would see his belt and his torso. Here is a shot of his face. His eyes, again, would have had some sort of semi-precious stones in him. He is classically early 5th century, or 5th century in general, with that severe style, that a serious stoic look. We can see from under his helmet, hair drops down upon his cheeks, very naturalistic. Notice that his lips are a little bit red because they used a higher copper content in the bronze in order to give it that color. And here is another shot of it. I don't know if you can see on the upper right, but you'd see where he was placed in the chariot, so we'd see his feet and then his torso, as I discussed before. There are also parts of the horses, we believe 4 horses that were in charge in front of his chariot, and we believe that they were held by a squire of some sort, an escort on the left, but we have only fragments of these. And here is one more shot of this wonderful, famous statue. So those are 2 cities, important sanctuary cities of Greece, Delos and Delphi. I want to point out, by the way, that both of these sites were occupied well before the 5th century and after the 5th century, or were used and had constructions on them. So though I cut to them during the 5th century, they have much longer history than that. Okay, the end.